Hi everybody, I hope you're doing great. Here's the note catcher that you need for today. Got 3 questions there for you. Alright, and the title of today's read aloud is The Bread Makers. Okay, and so remember that when a farmer would go into town, he or she would bring items from their farm to trade or sell. And when they leave town, they would take other items traded or bought from other tradespeople back home. And when you trade, the process of trading two things, it has a name. It's called what? Hopefully you remember. It's called bartering. Okay? See if you can remember some of the items that farmers might bring into town with them to trade. What might farmers bring to town to trade? Say it out loud. Talked about it with a family member. Okay, today's read aloud is about people who made bread. What kind of bread do you like to eat? Nowadays, you probably buy your bread at a store and it comes sliced, and there's lots of different kinds of bread. Probably just a few people can make their bread at home still. And you might also know that the main ingredient in bread is flour. It's that white powdery stuff. I know I've showed it to you before. And hopefully you remember where powder comes from too. If you don't remember, it comes from wheat plants. Okay? Remember in the first read aloud, you learned how bread was made at home in the country by the farmer's wife. Now, making bread took a long time because you had to plant the seeds to grow the wheat. You had to harvest the wheat or chop it down. You had to ground it into flour. You had to mix it with yeast and water. And then you had to bake it in the hearth or the oven. So making bread took a long time. There's lots of steps there. And I want you to pay attention to the read aloud a lot today to remember the different steps of how to make bread, because tomorrow you're going to do a little project where you have to cut out pictures and glue them in the right order. So pay attention to the different steps. We got 4 steps of how to make bread. Okay, and today you're going to learn about 2 tradespeople. One is the miller, say miller, and the other is a baker, say baker. And these 2 people helped with the different steps in making bread. Listen to find out more about today's topic, how bread was made in colonial times. Okay, this is called the bread makers, millers and bakers. All over the world for thousands of years, bread has been an important part of many people's diets. In almost every culture, people make bread or foods like bread. In Mexico, they eat tortillas. In India, they eat chapati. In Israel, they eat matzo. And in America, we may eat any of the above, plus bagels, muffins, biscuits, and sliced bread. In colonial times, most breads were made from wheat or corn. But where did the wheat come from? That's right, the farmer. But it was a long process from the farmer's field to the baker's shop. Today we're going to learn about what and who was involved with making bread. Okay, so hopefully you remember it by now. I know I just asked you, but which plant does flour come from? Which plant does flour come from? Think about it. First, the farmer planted his crops of wheat and corn. Then he harvested them or picked them when they were fully grown. And next, the farmer had to separate out the seeds or grains from the plant. Then the seeds had to be ground into flour. A long time ago, people used to grind their own wheat grains or corn kernels with big stones called grindstones. Okay, these are what the grindstones look like. Early grindstones used by native people all over the world were like the ones in this picture. One stone was larger and either flat or bowl-shaped, and the other stone was usually small enough to be held in the hand. The person grinding would spread some grains on larger stone and grind them with the smaller stone. So maybe you could pretend that you're doing it right now. You have the larger stone and you have the smaller stone, and pretend that you're grinding up that wheat. Imagine grinding 2 stones together all day long just to get enough flour to make 1 loaf of bread. This was hard work, and eventually people found a quicker way to do the job. Introducing the mill. Okay, so your first question says, how did a miller make flour? What did they do? What did they use? So you could say they would blank. Start with an uppercase letter. Leave those finger spaces in between, period at the end. Okay, now let's pay attention to what a mill would do. There's different mills. Mills existed in Europe long before people settled in America. A mill is a building with machinery that grinds grain into flour. A mill did the same thing as a person with a grindstone. It crushed the grains of wheat between two stones. The stones in a mill were called millstones, and they were very, very large, far too large for a person to lift. Instead of a person grinding the stones together, a giant machine grinds the heavy millstones in a mill together. The bigger the millstones, the more grain that the mill could crush into flour. Okay, so what's a mill? Talk to your family about it. What is a mill? Here's another type of mill called a water mill. And these were the most common type of mill in early America. They were built right on the rivers. The fast-flowing water made the big wheel turn around and around, and the wheel was connected to the gears that made the millstones inside the building turn. The heavy weight of the stones pressed hard to grind the grains. Okay, here's number 2. How does a water mill work? Okay, and parents, it might be a good idea to stop for a second and find another YouTube video that shows a mill moving so kids can see how it works a little bit better. You got time for that? Okay. All right, so we're trying to keep in our head, remember the different steps it takes to make bread. Okay, so we know it starts with the wheat. The wheat needs to be ground into flour. Here's the flour here. All right. The tradesperson in charge of the mill was called a miller. Say miller. The miller would charge farmers money or some of their grains to grind their wheat or corn into flour. The miller would grind the grain into flour, then collect the flour into bags. A miller with a water mill could grind and bag more flour in one day than a farmer with a grindstone could grind in weeks. So what's the name of the tradesperson who makes flour? They have a name. We just said it. If you forgot, that's okay. Rewind and try to remember. What's the name of the tradesperson whose job it is to make flour? Once the flour was ground, the miller sold some of it to the baker. The baker made bread, muffins, and cakes out of the flour that he got from the miller. And then the baker could sell those things in their shop. Okay, so look, we have the wheat that was grinded in the mill to make the big bags of flour. Now let's see what happens. To make dough, the baker mixed a lot of flour with a little bit of water and a little bit of salt. He also added a special ingredient called yeast. Say yeast. The yeast made the bread puff up and rise when it was baked. Okay, so the yeast wasn't important. Let me read that to you again so you can figure out why the yeast was important. The yeast made the bread puff up and rise when it was baked. Okay? So it says, why is yeast important? You could say it is important because, or you could just say it's blank. What does it do? Okay. Okay, write your answer down for that. Pause the video if you need to. And then one more thing I want you to remember in your brain, so I hope someone's next to you to talk to you. What are the ingredients that are in dough? What are the ingredients in bread dough? Okay, so let's go through our steps real quick too of how to bake bread, because this will help you with tomorrow's little project. Okay, so we've got to plant seeds to grow the wheat in the fields. That's the farmer's job. Okay, then once the wheat is chopped down, the wheat or the corn could be grounded in the mill to make that powder, which is called flour. Then the flour is mixed with those ingredients that you just came up with, maybe in a bowl or something like this, to make dough. All right, and listen to this. Next, the baker kneaded the dough with their hands. Okay, so maybe you could pretend like you got some dough in your hand and you're kind of like pushing it. This is called kneading the dough. Okay, kneading dough is like pressing and stretching the dough together lots of times and in different ways. Okay, so you're pushing it, you're rolling it, you're stretching it. Okay, that's called kneading the dough to make sure that all the ingredients are evenly mixed and the dough has the right consistency or thickness or stickiness or texture. Certain kinds of bread had to be kneaded for a long time before the dough was ready to bake. Okay, you guys, maybe you've seen dough before for bread, or maybe like pizza dough, maybe cookie dough. Dough is what something looks like before it goes into the oven. Okay? All right. And here's the last step. Next, the baker shaped the dough either by patting it with his hands or rolling it with a rolling pin. Okay? Pretend you have a rolling pin in your hand and you're rolling out the dough. Then it was time to put the bread into the oven. In the old days, ovens were brick or stone structures with a fire inside. When the bread was just the right shade of brown, the baker took it out of the oven and let it cool a while. Can't you just smell that wonderful aroma? An aroma is a smell, so pretend you're breathing in the aroma of the bread. That's freshly baked warm bread ready to eat. Bread is still made today in more or less the same way it was made in early America hundreds of years ago. Okay, parents, I know this is a long shot, but if you got time, maybe you can make some bread at home, show your kids the steps. The first step is making the dough. And bakers have to get up extra early, sometimes at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, to start making dough and start baking bread for their first customers. So customers are the people who give the baker money to buy what he or she has made. So today you're going to be writing about the word customers. Think of another place you might see customers, and you're going to write and draw about that today too. Even today, in many parts of the world, hungry customers stand outside the bakery door first thing in the morning to buy their bread and other breakfast treats. There is nothing better than fresh baked goodies to start your day. The end. All right. So, talk to your family. What was the main topic of today's read aloud? What was this read aloud all about? Okay. I'll give you a hint. The whole thing wasn't just about wheat. Okay. The whole thing wasn't just about dough. What was this whole thing all about? Okay. And then, besides a loaf of bread, what other foods are made with flour? What other foods are made with flour? And I can reread that part to you real quick, where it said it. Let's see. In almost every culture, people make bread or foods like bread. In Mexico, they eat tortillas. In India, they eat chapati. In Israel, they eat matzo. And in America, we may eat any of the above, plus bagels, muffins, biscuits, and sliced bread. Okay, so I just gave you a hint. What are some other things that are made out of flour? All right, and let's see if I got anything else for you. Nope, that's it. All right. So I hope you enjoyed learning about bakers and millers. I hope you remember what those two jobs are. Keep those ideas stuck in your head because it's going to help you out with the next read aloud. Okay, thanks everybody. Bye.